She stared at the clock on the white wall of the courtroom as if she could somehow turn back time. Amanda Reynolds, 27, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, sat on the polished wooden bench of the Cedar Falls District Court in Iowa, her trembling hands resting on the lap of her gray skirt. The room was a monument to American legal formality. Dark wood, imposing flags, the smell of old books, and a palpable sense that truth was not always enough to achieve justice. Judge Harmon, 70 years old and with an impassive expression cultivated over decades in the courtroom, adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents in front of him. He did not look at Amanda when he said, "Proceed with your testimony, Miss Reynolds." Amanda felt her throat go dry. Her testimony wasn't just important, it was all that stood between her and complete ruin. Her ex-boyfriend, Derek Walton, sitting across the room with his expensive lawyer and a confident smile, didn't seem the least bit worried. Why would he be? He came from a prominent Cedar Falls family. His father owned the town's largest employer. The Walton name was on half the historic buildings on Main Street. "Mrs. Reynolds?" Judge Harmon repeated, his patience visibly waning. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry." Amanda straightened up and tried to find her voice. She had rehearsed this dozens of times with her pro bono lawyer, a young and overworked woman named Melissa Chun. It was simple. Tell the truth about what Derek had done. The threats, the financial control, the trackers hidden in her car, the violence that started with small shoves and ended with her in the hospital with fractures. On the night of April 17th, Amanda began, feeling all eyes in the room on her. "I returned home after my shift at the cafeteria and found Derek waiting in the apartment. He was furious because I hadn't answered his calls during work." As she spoke, she saw Derek lean in and whisper something to his lawyer, both of them smiling discreetly. They weren't at all worried about her testimony. Why would they be? Derek had already lined up 6 witnesses, including his police officer cousin, who would swear he was at a poker game the night. Amanda ended up in the emergency, her word against theirs. Amanda continued, describing how the argument escalated, how Derek broke her phone, how he pushed her against the wall so hard she heard her own ribs crack. As she spoke, her voice trembled less and less. This might be her only chance to make someone hear the truth. "Can you present any evidence of these allegations, Miss Reynolds?" Judge Harmon asked when she finished her testimony. "The medical records have been presented, Your Honor," interjected Melissa, her lawyer. "Yes, I see the records of his injuries," the judge said, "but nothing here directly links Mr. Walton to those injuries. There are no independent witnesses to the alleged attack. Objection, Your Honor." Derek's lawyer stood up forcefully. "The defense is being characterized as guilty without sufficient evidence." "Accepted," replied the judge. "The jury will disregard the unproven implications." Amanda felt her stomach clench. It was exactly as she had predicted. Her word against his, and his was worth more in this city. It was then that she noticed the police officer standing silently near the courthouse door. It wasn't someone Amanda knew, perhaps a recently transferred officer. A woman in her 40s, erect posture, attentive, eyes that seemed to assess not only Amanda, but the entire dynamic of the room. Derek stood up to testify. He was the picture of respectability in his well-tailored suit and perfectly combed hair. He spoke confidently about how emotionally unstable Amanda was, how she had probably hurt herself during one of her episodes, how he had tried to help her, but she kept refusing psychological assistance. He was so convincing that Amanda almost believed him for a moment. "And on the night of April 17th, where were you, Mr. Walton?" asked his lawyer. "As previously stated, I was at my friend Paul Robertson's house for our weekly poker game. 6 people were present, all of whom signed statements confirming my presence from 7 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. The jury seemed convinced. Amanda looked at her hands. Would it all be in vain? All those months gathering courage, documenting injuries, finally obtaining the temporary restraining order that Derek continued to violate with impunity. And now, at the moment when she most needed to be heard, she felt completely silent. That's when something inside Amanda snapped. A final act of desperation. While Derek continued his perfectly rehearsed testimony, she placed her hands in her lap, hidden from the view of almost everyone in the room, discreetly, with trembling fingers. She began to make the signs she had learned in the support group for victims of domestic abuse, a secret language developed so that women could ask for help when they were under the watch of their abusers. It was a subtle movement, thumb folded into the palm, 4 fingers briefly closed over it, then extended again, repeated 3 times. An international signal that meant, I am in danger. I need help. I cannot speak freely. Amanda wasn't sure if anyone there even knew the signal. It was a desperate attempt, but it was all she had left. As her fingers moved, she kept her face impassive, as if she were merely listening politely to the man who had almost killed her lie under oath. She didn't notice immediately, but the police officer near the door had. The officer's experienced eyes caught the subtle movement, recognizing it instantly. The officer, Lieutenant Catherine Diaz, had worked for years with victims of domestic violence in Chicago before transferring to Cedar Falls. She knew the signal, and more importantly, she knew the look in Amanda's eyes, the mixture of despair and resignation she had seen hundreds of times before. Derek's testimony continued fluently. Amanda always had difficulty controlling her anger. I tried to help her seek therapy several times, but she, Your Honor, Lieutenant Diaz's firm voice interrupted the testimony, causing surprise in the room. I request permission to address the court. Judge Harmond frowned at the interruption. This is highly irregular. Officer, Lieutenant Catherine Diaz, sir. Cedar Falls Police Department. This is an urgent matter related to this case. The judge hesitated, clearly annoyed by the breach of protocol. Come closer. Lieutenant Diaz walked with firm steps to the judge's bench. Amanda watched, confused, as the officer spoke in a low voice to the judge. Occasionally, his gaze would turn to Derek, whose confident expression was beginning to falter. After a few minutes of discussion, Judge Harmond adjusted himself in his chair and said, The court will take a 30-minute recess. The jury must refrain from discussing the case during this interval. The room filled with confused murmurs as the judge retired to his chambers, followed by Lieutenant Diaz. Derek turned to his lawyer, visibly nervous for the first time. Amanda remained seated, stunned and unaware of what was happening. Melissa approached her. What was that? Amanda asked. I'm not sure, Melissa replied, but the officer asked to speak to the judge privately, something about new evidence. 30 minutes later, when everyone had returned to their seat, the atmosphere in the room had subtly changed. Judge Harmond seemed more serious than before, and Lieutenant Diaz had moved to stand closer to the prosecution's table. Following information brought to the attention of this court by Lieutenant Diaz, the judge announced, I have received emergency authorization to access certain electronic evidence relevant to this case. Derek visibly paled. Your Honor, what kind of evidence, Mr. Walton? You are not permitted to speak at this time. The judge interrupted him sternly. Lieutenant Diaz, please present to the court what you have discovered. Lieutenant Diaz stepped forward with a tablet in hand. Your Honor, after noticing signs of distress from Mrs. Reynolds, I conducted a quick check of the GPS positioning records of Mr. Walton's vehicle on the evening of April 17th. As a vehicle registered under his father's company fleet, all movements are automatically logged for insurance and tax purposes. Derek's lawyer stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is a blatant violation of my client's privacy without a proper warrant. The warrant was obtained during the recess, Counselor, the judge replied curtly. And, as Lieutenant Diaz kindly informed me, these records are considered commercial documents available upon proper subpoena, which we now have. Continue, Lieutenant. Derek looked like he'd been hit by a train. His face paled even more as Lieutenant Diaz showed him a screen with a map and GPS data. Records show that Mr. Walton's vehicle was parked at Mrs. Reynolds' address from 8:15 p.m. to 9:48 p.m. on the evening in question, precisely the period during which she alleges the attack occurred, and inconsistent with her claim of being at a poker game all night. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Amanda felt a wave of relief so powerful that her eyes filled with tears. Someone had believed. Someone had believed. Someone had acted. Furthermore, Lieutenant Diaz continued, based on this finding, we obtained authorization to access Mr. Walton's cell phone location records, which confirm the vehicle's GPS data, They also reveal a pattern of unauthorized presence near Ms. Reynolds' residence on at least 7 occasions since the temporary restraining order was issued. Derek's lawyer was now in a panic, furiously whispering to his client. Derek looked like a cornered animal, his eyes wide and his face covered in sweat. "Your Honor," Lieutenant Diaz added, "based on these findings, we also reviewed the security cameras from Ms. Reynolds' building. Although many images are no longer available due to the 60-day retention policy, we were still able to retrieve footage from the evening of April 17th, showing Mr. Walton entering the building at 8:12 p.m. and leaving at," opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lawyer intervened. "My client would like to modify his testimony, Your Honor." "I imagine so," the judge replied coldly. "And what about the 6 witnesses who signed statements confirming Mr. Walton's alibi, including Officer Robert Walton of the police department?" Derek remained silent, his world visibly crumbling around him. "Lieutenant Diaz," the judge continued, "please ensure that a full investigation is initiated into all individuals who provided false testimony in this case. And I want a complete review of all previous cases involving Officer Walton." "Yes, Your Honor," replied the lieutenant, glancing briefly at Amanda in a gesture of understanding. The courtroom now had a completely different atmosphere. Derek, who had entered like the prince of the city, sat his facade of respectability crumbling. His own lawyer seemed to be walking away from him, both literally and figuratively. In light of this new evidence, the judge announced, "This court immediately grants a permanent restraining order against Derek Walton, prohibiting any contact with Amanda Reynolds. Furthermore, based on the evidence of perjury and falsifying testimony, I am referring this case to the prosecution for possible criminal charges. Mr. Walton, you are in custody until a bail hearing can be held." As the court officers approached to escort Derek out of the room, the feeling of liberation that washed over Amanda was overwhelming. She looked at Lieutenant Diaz, who nodded discreetly, a simple gesture between women, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes systems fail, but the people within them can still make a difference. After the court dismissed, Amanda found herself standing in the hallway, still trying to process what had happened. Life as she knew it had just changed completely. A door had been opened to a future where she no longer had to live in fear. "Miss Reynolds?" Lieutenant Diaz approached. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Amanda nodded, wiping away the tears she finally allowed herself to shed. "How did you know?" "The sign, I mean, double quotes. I worked for 10 years in the domestic violence unit in Chicago," the lieutenant explained. "I've recognized this signal since day 1 of training. It's the same all over the country. I learned it in the support group," Amanda said softly. "I never thought I'd actually use it." "Well, it's a good thing you used it." Lieutenant Diaz placed a hand gently on Amanda's shoulder. "And it's a good thing I was here to see it. Why were you in court today?" "You didn't even know my case." The lieutenant smiled slightly. "I've been reviewing all the domestic violence cases in the district since I arrived. I've seen troubling patterns, especially in cases involving certain influential families." The meaning did not go unnoticed by Amanda. "So, Derek maybe it's not the first time he's done this. I cannot comment on ongoing investigations," the lieutenant replied diplomatically. "But I can say that, thanks to your courage today, many doors have been opened that needed to be opened a long time ago." In the following weeks, Cedar Falls witnessed a transformation. What began with Amanda's subtle gesture in court became a cascade of revelations. Derek Walton was charged not only with assaulting Amanda, but also 2 former girlfriends who finally found the courage to speak out. His police officer cousin was suspended and later fired for obstruction of justice and falsifying police reports. A wider investigation uncovered a pattern of shelved cases, ignored evidence, and silenced victims, all connected to influential families in the city. Lieutenant Catherine Diaz became a central figure in reforming the local police department. With the support of a new police chief, she established a specialized domestic violence unit, implemented new training protocols, and created a system to ensure that no victim was ignored, regardless of who their abuser was. For Amanda, the recovery journey was complex and nonlinear. Some nights, she still woke up startled, her heart racing. Some days, she still struggled to believe she was truly safe. But other days, increasingly frequent, she rediscovered small freedoms. Walking down the street without constantly checking her shoulder, answering the phone without fear, making plans for a future that now seemed possible. 6 months after the trial, Amanda found herself sitting in a different coffee shop than the one where she used to work, this time as a customer, not an employee. She was studying for her first semester at state law school, something she had abandoned when Derek entered her life 3 years earlier. The books scattered before her seemed like a mountain to climb, but for the first time in years, she felt capable of overcoming challenges. Is this place occupied? Amanda looked up and saw Lieutenant Diaz. No, Catherine, as she insisted on being called, outside of work holding a mug of coffee. All yours, Amanda smiled, pushing some books aside to make. Catherine sat down, observing the legal text. Procedural law? That sounds fascinating. It's complex, but I'm learning, Amanda replied. Actually, I'm thinking of specializing in family law, maybe working on domestic violence cases after I graduate. That makes sense. Sometimes, those who best understand the broken system are the ones who have been hurt by it. They were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Amanda who finally spoke. I wish I'd had someone like you from the start. Someone who knew what to look for, who understood. It took me so long to be heard. ... That's why what we're doing now is so important, Catherine said. The training program we've implemented in the department is teaching all officers to recognize those subtle signs, to listen beyond the spoken word. Amanda nodded, thinking of the other women who had come forward after her case, not just Derek's victims, but dozens of others in the city who finally felt they could be heard. I almost gave up that day in court, Amanda confessed. I thought no one would ever believe my word against his. But you didn't give up, Catherine observed. You made that sign. One last attempt. Amanda looked at her own hand, the same hands that had made the silent gesture that day that changed everything. It was instinctive, almost, like a last cry for help when you think no one is listening, and that's exactly the point of the signal, Karen said softly. For when words are too dangerous or when no one is listening, it's a language for those who need to be seen without being noticed. From the outside of the coffee shop, Cedar Falls looked like the same quaint town as always, the same tree-lined streets, the same historic facades on Main Street, many still bearing the Walton name. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. In the police stations, emergency rooms, shelters, and courthouses, a new system was taking shape, one that saw what was once invisible, heard what was once silent. For Amanda, the transformation was both personal and universal. Every step she took through the city now carried a new purpose. Every book she studied was a tool for the future she was building. Every conversation with Catherine was a reminder that even in the most imperfect system, courageous people can create change. That afternoon, as she said goodbye to Catherine and gathered her books, Amanda noticed a young woman at the next table watching them. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of hope and fear that Amanda instantly recognized. When their eyes met, Amanda smiled gently at her. She didn't know the woman's story, what battles she was fighting, but she knew that, thanks to what had happened that day in court, whatever silent signal that woman needed to make, there was now a greater chance that someone would be paying attention. It was a small consolation, perhaps, in the face of the magnitude of the problem. But as Amanda had learned, sometimes all that separates despair from hope is a single moment of being seen, a gesture, a look of recognition, an act of courage that inspires others. In a city that for generations had allowed certain men to act with impunity, the hands of one woman had begun to turn the tide. And in a system built to protect the powerful, a police officer had chosen to see what others ignored. Amanda put the last book in her backpack and stood up. She had a class in 20 minutes and then a meeting with the support group where she had once learned the signal that saved her life. Today, she wouldn't be there as a victim seeking help, but as a survivor showing the way. With one last smile for the young woman at the next table, Amanda stepped out into the sunlight, no longer walking in the shadows of her past, but toward the future she could finally imagine. The town of Cedar Falls would continue to confront its own demons. Old power structures would resist change. New Dereks would emerge. But there would also be more Catherines in the police department, more Amandas in the courts, and perhaps most importantly, more hands making signs and more eyes trained to see them. And perhaps, with time, these signs wouldn't even be necessary anymore. Perhaps one day, a woman's words would be enough. Until then, Amanda would continue studying. Catherine would remain vigilant, and that silent language of the survivors would persist, a code passed from woman to woman, a reminder that, even when the world seems to conspire to silence, there are always ways to be heard. There is always someone who can see through the lies and the power, someone who can notice a small gesture made with trembling fingers and transform it into justice.